The LinkedIn Podcast Network is sponsored by TIAA. TIAA makes you a retirement promise, a promise of a guaranteed retirement paycheck for life. Learn more at TIAA.org/promises pay off.
LinkedIn presents.
I'm Maura Aarons-Mele, and this is The Anxious Achiever. We look at stories from business leaders who've dealt with anxiety, depression, or other mental health challenges, how they fell down, how they pick themselves up, and how they hope work will change in the future. The conversation around mental health, it's never really finished. It's not about an awareness month or a 2-hour awareness session. It's an ongoing thing that we all need to be aware of and constantly evolve on. And incorporating mentally healthy practice into your work is something a lot of us don't think about or we don't know how to do. But it's a discipline and it's a skill, just like filing your expense reports or showing up every day. That's why we think it's really important on the show to follow up with some of our favorite guests from past seasons and see where they are now. I'm super excited to bring back Priska Neely today. We first talked to Priska early in the pandemic. She was just beginning her first job as a manager, and she really hoped to lead from a place of empathy and understanding. I invited her back to see how her relationship with her team has gone and how her career has progressed and what she's learned. I think you'll take away some practical tips on how to be a more mentally healthy manager, considering things like onboarding and building a real team culture over Zoom. And if your manager needs these ideas, you could slyly suggest they have a listen to the show. Priska Neely is a journalist, and she's now the managing editor of the Gulf States Newsroom, a public radio collective covering Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. Here's our conversation. Okay, so last time we spoke, you were kind of gearing up for this new role, which was going to be an exciting job, but much more sort of leadership-oriented, management-oriented than your previous roles as a reporter and producing. And you were really thoughtful about the way you wanted to lead. We talked a lot about how you wanted to really try and do right by the people who were going to be working for you. So have you done right by them? Like, what grade would you give yourself right now?
I was re-listening to, our last conversation this morning, actually, and it was an interesting journey for me to listen to that, Priska. So naive. No. I think that it felt actually really good to listen to that conversation and know that, I was working toward a goal in leadership for a long time. And I had, said in that conversation, and I remember feeling at the time that, it was a little bit scary to achieve the thing that you've been working toward for so long, but to still not really know how it's going to go. And, are you going to really want to be this manager that you've been trying to be for so long? And so, I'm happy to say that a year and a half in, I feel like I'm definitely in the right place. And just recently, I won the Editor of the Year award from the Public Media Journalists Association. And that's something that my reporters nominated me for. So
oh my God,
that is huge and probably means more than any award that I've ever gotten because this is something that, your team submits you for. So that really meant a lot.
That is beautiful. Congratulations. And I remember you sharing that even before you were a manager, someone had said to you, I want to be managed by you one day. So did that prophecy come true? I mean, that's beautiful that they nominated you. Wow.
Yeah. I feel, definitely like I have built a really strong team and I'm fulfilled by the work of team building and being in the role to help other people do their best work rather than creating content myself, rather than being out in the field, doing the journalism, having those conversations to shape stories and help people accomplish their dreams and, hear from them, what do you want to do? And still remain extremely passionate about onboarding and Yeah, I mean, I guess another thing that I'm really proud of in the last year or so is I've now hired 7 people, and in that process, I was just developing a lot of systems for welcoming the team, especially when they're spread out across states and all, really in different work systems and different work environments. And so how am I going to make this feel like a team with people I've never met? And so I just had a lot of different ways to welcome people. And it was essentially like whatever, all the things that you do when someone leaves, I was just like, I'm going to front load that and have that as a welcome package.
Like what?
So, swag, always a nice swag gift set. Public radio, we love tote bags and T-shirts and mugs and all of that. So, sending them a package when they start, it was during the pandemic. So even if I had been in the same space, probably wouldn't have been able to take them to lunch, but I would send them a gift card for, food delivery service for that first day. And then having like a Zoom party where you have to have an activity. You can't just like all come and stare at each other, but you have an activity where we would do trivia and there would be a prize or different icebreakers, lots of icebreakers to get to know each other. And we start our weekly meeting each week with kind of like, what's the best thing that's happened to you in the last week, a la Sam Sanders, and it's been a minute. What's the best thing that's happened to you in the last week? Not work related, but so we can learn about each other and what our interests are outside of work. And that's something that I've really liked in just kind of getting to know people. And I managed the first reporter I hired. I didn't meet her in person for 6 months.
Wow.
We were working together, every day. And when we met, it was kind of just like, okay. Like it was cool, great to meet in person, but it didn't feel that different because I call it forced bonding.
There's another okay to call it that.
Because in the beginning, sometimes people would be like rolling their, or not maybe rolling their eyes, but being like, what is this that we're doing?
Yeah.
Like, what is this icebreaker? And then, I would schedule another meeting. They'd be like, oh, are we going to do one of those games? And I'm like, wait, so you like the game? You like the trivia? Wait, what is this that I'm hearing? So, yeah.
I mean, first of all, I love the onboarding idea because I think so much onboarding is just so terrible across the board. So I hope that listeners can take something away. I want to talk about management. I have to say that my favorite thing about management is helping people feel confident, right? And like being the lighthouse, right? There's a great metaphor in parenting, the lighthouse parenting. Like, I'm not going to sail the ship for you, but in a storm, you can see my light and you'll know I provide safe harbor if you need me. And like, for me, that's what I love about managing. What I hate about managing is having to, and I'm in client services, so is having to be that person who sometimes has to have the really excruciating, uncomfortable conversations, either directly with someone or on behalf of someone on my team. So that's like what I avoid. I'm going to ask you, like you said, what you are loving about managing. Like what has surprised you that you really don't like or that you really think you need to work on?
Well, to not to paint too rosy of a picture. I mean, I am really happy and proud of myself in like how I've grown in confidence, especially as a leader since we last talked. But this job has been incredibly difficult also. And it's been, I'm really proud of what we accomplished, but this is the hardest job I've ever had and the hardest job I hope to ever have. And, there've just been a lot of challenges, and I really do love that setting that foundation in the beginning. And, I felt like I came up with a really good onboarding plan, and I was, first time manager, but, some of the other managers that I worked with were like, hey, like, what do you do again? Can you give me that worksheet? Can you give me that conversation starter? And so I decided to write, kind of an onboarding guide that I got published in one of the like public media. It's on Current, the public media trade. And it's been extremely popular, and it was one of their like top 10 pieces of the year. And I just thought that what I was saying was like extremely basic of like welcome people, set clear expectations. But a lot of people found it like really,
Oh, dear.
like, wow. So, so I said like at the end of the year, I was like, oh, I'm really happy to have this as one of the top 10. But I also look forward to the day when this is not like a novel approach.
Mm-hmm.
And, one of the things that I really do like doing in those first few days is having a conversation. I, create this document that's like employee expectations where we go over the job description and kind of what I'm expecting from them week to week or month to month. And we set goals for like 1 month, 3 months, 6 months. And that's something that was actually done for me at a previous job. And so that was definitely something that I wanted to take forward with me. But we also fill out this worksheet together that's like what I expect from my manager and how I like to be managed, where we talk about how do you respond to stress and what's the best way to confront you if there's, what's the best way to give feedback? What's the best way to communicate? How do you like to, what's most important to you outside of work? And we have these like really intense conversations when it's someone you've only been working with for a couple of days and have only really talked to in job interviews before that. But I found those conversations extremely helpful because, if you don't do it in the beginning, some of those questions are not going to organically come up.
No.
So you have to really be intentional about it. And I found that learning about those differences, and, right now I manage 6 different people and I have extremely different styles with all of them in terms of communication and feedback. And all of our one-on-ones are very different. And so those difficult conversations that I have had and that I do sort of dread have been better because of setting that foundation. And because one of the things that I've told everyone in hiring, everyone in like job screen, like early conversations, but also like definitely when I've hired someone is, I need you to tell me when something's not working. Like, especially if we're not in the same state, we're not in the same place. I don't know what you're going through. I need you to tell me because I will do my best to fix it, but I can't fix things if I don't know that it's an issue.
You're lifting something up for me that I really think is crucial in a hybrid work environment, which is, I call it reducing anxiety through clarity. I think that part of what makes us really anxious, manager and staff, is that when we're not together, we have a hard time knowing what each other expects of each other. Like, is what does my boss want of me? Like, ultimately, most of us want to please each other. And so hybrid and remote work makes that really challenging, especially if you're a new team. And people get really anxious and they act out their anxiety. And so what you're doing is you're setting clear milestones and expectations. And I'm curious if you think that that makes your people less anxious, but also if it makes you less anxious.
Yes, definitely on both sides. And at a previous job, I just had a pretty simple thing. It was like I started on a Monday and on the Friday before, they sent a 2-week sketch of like kind of the basic meetings that you have. And that was for a position that I was going in every day. But I found that hugely, it just calmed me down so much. And so especially with the remote work, I always do that. And even to say, because when I started my job, I was like, how do I get my computer? Or like, the first day, the first day is not the same. So I was like, wait, when will I do that? So I just wanted to make sure that everyone I brought in, that question was answered. Like, this is the time to be there. And, this is when you're going to pick up your equipment. And, this is the first meeting. So just that, I think that the thing about the onboarding guide that I've put together, and every time I do it, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a lot of work. Why did I make this up? Because it takes so much effort to plan and schedule out all those things. And in order to explain something to someone else, you need to know what it is. I think that's the issue with training so often, is that like in order for me to tell the person to expect in what to expect in the first 2 weeks, I need to know what they're going to be doing for the first 2 weeks. I have to figure that out in order to tell them. Right. So it forces me to make sure that I have a plan for them. But it also, I think, really relieves that anxiety because it did it for me. And so I knew I wanted to, it was part of my notes to my future manager self. Like I just added that on, like, give them a calendar of what to expect.
The LinkedIn Podcast Network is sponsored by TIAA. In the last 100 years, we've seen financial markets swing, new currencies come and go, decades of savings lost in days, all showing that a retirement plan without a guarantee, quite simply, isn't enough. So more than a retirement plan, TIAA makes you a retirement promise. A promise of a guaranteed retirement paycheck for life. A promise that pays off. Learn more at TIAA.org/promisespayoff.
Let's talk about you. How has the role treated you, and what grade would you give that, and why? Your mental health, your emotional well-being, your stress.
It's been a real journey. I started working from home, having moved across the country, and first time manager, first time editor, a lot of new things, and running a new type of newsroom.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to form a lot of relationships with people that I wasn't able to meet face to face. So, the task was very challenging. And in the first few months, I was really, really overwhelmed. I mean, I would have these check-ins with my boss, and I was just like crying and like doubting myself, like, this is so hard, and really doubting, should I have gotten, should they have hired someone who had done some of these things before? But, he was very reassuring and saying, we chose you for a reason, we're going to figure this out, we're going to figure this out. And then he left a couple of months in. So then I was without that like guiding force. So it was really, really hard in the beginning. It was very, very hard. And I'd moved to Birmingham for the job, but I actually went and worked from Maryland and stayed with my family for a while just because that I needed that support. I remember just like being at my sister's house and sitting in her sunroom and trying to make all these big decisions about hiring and just like, crying and then like pulling myself together for a Zoom meeting. And she would sometimes be like, whoa, that was like scary how you were able to like pull yourself together. But, I say that the trajectory for me was in the beginning, I said, wow, this job is really hard and therefore I'm not good at it. And then after like 3 or 4 months, I was just like, oh, this job is really hard, because I was talking to my mentors and I was talking to other people in slightly similar roles. And they were like, oh, well, I didn't really have to do that. Or I didn't have to hire a bunch of people when I first started. Or, I had time to like build out the mission and then hire people. Or, I've only ever managed teams where everyone was already hired. I've never had to build a team. And so then I realized how unique the role was. And so I was like, oh, this job is just hard. And then I was like, when I started, developing these systems and other people started coming to me and being like, hey, what's that you're doing? I was like, oh, this job is hard and everyone's figuring out what they're doing in their jobs. There is no one right way to do it. And then probably like 9 months or a year in, I was like, this job is really hard and I'm pretty good at it. And I actually don't understand how any of this would have happened without me, because I have so many unique conversations and over communicating messages. And I mean, I don't know. I just communicate with so many different people and in so many different specifically catered ways. And I can't imagine really anyone else doing what I did.
I mean, honestly, the thing that I will never forget about our conversation back in season 3, we're now in season 6, was the intentionality with which you communicate and with which you were planning to communicate. And I want to ask you a question. I'm going to pull up this quote. You said, I think you learned from your dad, who's a pastor. And you said in an article in Pointer, I've had to ask for help. There were a couple meetings where we had hit big milestones in the collaboration and there was just radio silence from the executive team. And that was disappointing to me. And I'm like, hey, as a reminder, I moved across the country during a pandemic. I'm working out of my apartment alone. If you're thinking thoughts, I need you to tell me. I don't know what you're thinking. I don't get any feedback. I feel like that is something that 99% of us who have worked for people are like nodding our heads and being like, just tell me what you're thinking. Give me some feedback. Think of me. But I also get a sense that you might have felt kind of like lonely.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it was a challenging time. I mean, obviously for everyone, isolation was a big issue at that point in the pandemic. And, I didn't have like a support system here. I mean, that's, a big part of the reason that I was just like, hey, I got to go home. Like I got to be around my sister and my nephews right now and, see my mom and my dad, to be able to have some of those conversations in person. But yeah, I mean, I think that when you are working and you can't see people, something that I've tried to instill in my team is like, hey, we're going to hype each other up. Like if you see something that you like, if you guys, if you do a story and you hear it and you're like, whoa, how did they, mix that? Or, whatever thought that you have about someone's reporting, or that was a really great sentence or whatever, tell them, post on Slack about it, text them about it. Because I think when you're not walking down the hall together, if you were walking down the hall together, you would say that. You would say, oh my gosh, I really liked your piece this morning. Like if you saw them, you would remember to do that. But I think so often it's out of sight, out of mind. And so I'm like, you need to have that intentional, feedback, because think about how it, and what I've told my team is like, think about how it feels when someone says that to you, like the smallest text message of like, hey, loved that story. Like those endorphins, like it feels great. So I'm like, do that for other people and like tweet each other's stories, like get people amped up about what you're doing. And because that makes such a big difference. But, just kind of in the position that I'm in, I have like no boss and 5 bosses. So it's hard to get feedback. And I think in the beginning, because I wasn't confident as a leader in, the changes I was making, I would, kind of ask for, is this what we should do? Or how do you feel about this? And then over time, I just realized, I can't wait for feedback to make all my decisions. And I'm just like, okay, this is what we're doing. Let me know if you have an issue with it. This is what we're doing. And over time, people started to trust me. But I think that it can be really hard sometimes in the midst of everything to remember to say those thoughts out loud or tell someone when you have that thought of like, oh, cool, nice. And you just keep it in. You keep it into yourself. Tell someone.
Totally.
Because it can make such a big difference.
Oh my gosh, it makes the biggest difference. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about grief, because when we originally spoke, we talked about grief. You have dealt with grief. You were planning. You had sort of thoughts about how you were going to communicate with your team. You don't shy away from talking about the hard stuff. And I'm curious if that has been something, grief, fear, just the anxiety that's been in the air for all of us in the period that you've been a leader. How has that been? How has it been to work with a new team who is working in such sad, anxious, scary times been for you? And have your own experiences helped you in that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's undeniable circumstances, the backdrop of everything. If you give someone an assignment, if you, set whatever expectations you may set in that onboarding meeting, they may have an off week. There may be something going on in people's personal lives. And I just think that, I had a manager one time who told me, like, I don't know, we were talking about taking vacations. We were working on the vacation schedule, and it was always kind of a nightmare because everyone would be gone at the same time. But their philosophy was just kind of like, are you going to remember this one segment that you produced, or are you going to remember that trip you took to Mexico or whatever? And, like what really matters, I think, is something that I ask myself. Like sometimes things can seem so big. Like, oh, we said that story was going to run on Tuesday, so it's got to run on Tuesday. And I remember just like catching myself at one point, I don't know, maybe 6 months in, and just being like, a lot of these are arbitrary deadlines, and like what actually matters? What actually matters? And I'm okay sometimes to send an email that's saying, hey, we're pushing this back a day. And it's like, it doesn't really matter. And, I've had conversations with my reporters when there's something going on with their health or family's health or emotions or whatever it may be. And I've said multiple times, like, this story, I want to finish this story, but like, this does not matter as much as what you're dealing with. Like, it doesn't. There's like no scenario in which we're going to look back on this 5 years from now and be like, remember when we moved it from Tuesday to Thursday? Like, there's just not a scenario in which that's going to happen. And so I ask myself, like, what matters? Another question that I ask myself when things seem like so big or devastating or a conversation is scary is like, would this be in your memoir?
Ooh.
And sometimes the answer is yes, because like work things are going to be in my memoir. You know, there have been moments that seemed small, but are, you know, definitely are going to stick with me. But sometimes it's like, absolutely not. I am not going to remember this next month. You know, and yeah, I don't know. There was a point last year where, you know, I had to take some time off for my health, and that was really scary to do. But I made that decision because I knew that I wouldn't be able to be there for the team if I didn't leave them for a few weeks. And that was really scary. But I'm so glad that I did that. I'm so glad that I prioritized myself in that way. And I feel that it's been like 6 months since then. And I feel like people have mostly forgotten that happened. Like things that seem so big in the moment. Sometimes it's just like... It just with time, it's just what matters, you know? It just changes so much.
That is such good advice when it comes to asking for what you need at work. Because so many of us don't because we feel like it will stain us forever.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, these are all in certain circumstances where sometimes people do hold things against you. Sometimes managers, you know, can't let things go or are very, you know, particular about when things get done. But, you know, and I think sometimes in the news business, you know, our work does matter. And, you know, in public radio, it's very mission driven and we want to make change and we want to, you know, we want to do good work that's impactful. But, you know, sometimes it's just like, you know, if someone's going through something, or if we need to move a story a month or a day, or if we need to change this, or if we need to let a story go because, you know, they're not getting, you know, it's just like what really matters. I think asking myself that question of like, does it really matter or why does it matter? It doesn't matter just because to me. Does it matter because I'm going to have to change something? And then just like separating what I have control over and what I don't have control over. That was actually something that was interesting when I was re-listening to our previous conversation. I said that there. I said was like, you know, realizing what I have control over and what I don't. And I definitely didn't really understand what that meant at the time in the way that I do now. Just, I guess, learning what to let go of. Learning where I can make a difference and where I can't. Or when, you know, in setting goals to say, this is something that I can reasonably accomplish this month. And this is something that's it's gonna take like a year, if I'm being honest, you know, just kind of learning how to set realistic expectations, just even for myself, you know. And, you know, it's something in hiring conversations I often say, you know, when people say, you know, when do you expect to have a decision or whatever, and I set a clear hiring timetable. So I'll always have these goals that I back time to make, you know, see that we can get someone on by the time that we need. But I always say, like, in those phone screeners or whatever it may be, like, you know, my goal is to have someone start by this date. But, you know, one thing I've learned in this job is everything takes longer than I expect it to. So that's my goal, but it may be off from that. And just being honest, because things can feel so big, but then, like, a lot of times, like, the deadlines aren't real. Like one time I was talking to a friend and, you know, we were out shopping or something and we kind of lost track of time and she was supposed to be back home by 6 o'clock or something. And she's like, oh no, I'm going to be late, you know, but it was 5. And I was like, well, why don't you just text your friend and say, can we meet at 6:30? You know, like there was all of this like urgency and anxiety over something that was movable, you know? So, I mean, I think that's something that's really helped me is like I've realized that a lot of my anxiety is like for made up reasons, things that I can change.
What else have you learned about managing your anxiety over the past year and a half?
You know, I think I'm a real giver, and I've had some kind of like family stuff going on with needing to be a caregiver for a period of time. And I think a lot of times in those situations, people ask, well, you know, caregiving is so exhausting, but make sure you're taking care of yourself. Are you taking care of yourself? And I'm like, no, I'm not taking care of myself. I'm not taking when and with what time and what energy would I take care of myself? Like, I don't know what that means, but I think that I have learned to, to like figure out the sprint, I guess. Like, okay, I need, I know that I'm going to need to be doing this caregiving for like 2 weeks, but after that, I'm going to give myself a long weekend. I'm going to take the day off, or I'm going to do this thing that I really know that I'm going to look forward to, and just trying to like, I guess, kind of protect myself in that way, just being realistic about what I'm able to do. Like, I'm a single woman. Like, I don't have someone else, like living with me and like being a partner to me day to day. So how do you take care of yourself? It's sometimes it's something that how do I make myself feel special when I'm always trying to like make other people feel special? That's a journey that I'm still on. But I will say that I am crying less overall, because we talked about crying last time too. And I do cry less, or I think I cry differently. I cry, it's like, okay, something has happened. This was upsetting, cry, and then like move on, because I think I've realized some different things about my brain, which is just like, I have a problem solving brain. And even if something happens, if it's a staffing change, if it's something, that's upsetting, that makes me want to cry, I will cry. I'm not going to not cry. I go for a walk. I would do whatever. I let it out. But in those tears, my brain will come up with a solution. It'll be like, okay, well, this sucks, but what if you did this, 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 and this? And I'll be like, I don't know, that is a good idea, And I'm like, as I'm crying, like coming up with this solution. So then like the next day, I'll just be like, okay, I cried my tears and this is what we're doing now. And people are like, are you okay? Are you okay? And I'm like, yeah, I've moved on. Like, I guess I've decided how much of my energy do I want to give to this stuff, because this is, like I said, it's a really, really hard job, and I do enjoy it. I really do enjoy it, but I have to protect myself. I have to figure out ways to protect myself because of all the empathy that I have, And I think another thing that I've done to just kind of protect myself is try to, when I'm not at work, just like really just be thinking about other things. And I often like don't really talk about it either.
You don't talk about work when you're not there,
which can be challenging for like when people will be like, oh, on a Sunday, like, what do you have coming up this week? Like last week I went for a walk with my friend, and she's like, so what's your week looking like? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm not thinking about it right now. Like, I don't know. I cannot think about it.
I feel like if I didn't think and talk about work, like I'd have like a Grand Canyon size like hole in my brain.
I mean, catch me on a Thursday evening and I'll rant about all sorts of things. But on the weekends, I really try to not. I don't know.
That is
it doesn't
impressive.
Always work, but I try to just do other things, even if it's like cleaning my apartment. Yep. I don't know.
Oh, Priska, well, I hope we can catch up again in another year and a half or even sooner. And I wish you all the best.
Thank you so much. Really great to talk to you again.
That's it for today's show. The Anxious Achiever is produced and edited by Mary Dew. Our assistant producer and sound engineer is Nick Krinko. Many thanks to all our guests for sharing their stories with us. And thank you to our advertisers for supporting. If you want to share your story about mental health and work, send me a message on LinkedIn. I'll always respond. If you love the show, tell your friends, subscribe or follow us, and leave a review. From LinkedIn Presents, this is Maura Aarons-Mele.